Recording in progress. Good morning, querido Paco, Michael. Anda en el baño, yo creo. Paco, respóndeme, heme aquí.
Hola, hola, hola May, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, 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 gracias.
¿Qué cuentas?
Nada, aquí, ya, con este librazo.
¿Con el cafecito o qué?
Librazo.
¿Con el café?
No, ahorita voy por uno para levantarme, mejor.
Pues vámonos, ahorita,
Vamos, sí,
órale, ahorita
va.
nos vemos. Bye.
Argentée de son cœur brûlant, elle tisse des rêves avec des fils éclatants. Dans la brise légère, elle danse, elle s'envole, voleuse d'étoiles, son éclat est bien plus fort. Les regards se perdent dans son sillage doré, comme un phare dans la brume, elle reste à jamais. Elle trace sa route sans hésiter, les rêves qui brûlent, elle sait les dompter. Dans l'infini de la nuit, son éclat guide, sous les étoiles, témoin, son cœur palpite. Avec passion et intensité,
Hola, May, no te digas milagros, te escuché, gracias.
elle brave les vents et les marées. Sous les flots argentés de son cœur brûlant, elle tisse des rêves avec des fils éclatants. Dans la brise légère, elle danse, elle s'envole, voleuse d'étoiles, son éclat est bien plus fort. Sous la lune, le soir trop loin, s'histoire et voix sur fond de fin, ni naviguer, son éditant. Sa voix douce murmure au vent, guidée par une étoile, son éclat persistant. Chaque note, une promesse à l'univers, les rêves et les réalités unissent leurs vers. Elle inspire, elle transforme chaque instant, ses yeux brillent, reflet d'un feu ardent. Dans l'ombre douce, elle respire le mystère, sa lumière éclaire même les cieux austères. Chaque nuit, elle gravit des montagnes étoiles et son éclat chuchote une force vitale. Elle s'étend une lueur dans l'aube dorée, un sourire si doux, jamais effrayé. Ésourdé par le crépuscule naissant, ses yeux captent les couleurs changeantes. Chaque rêve devient une douce mélodie. Dans la brume, son aura reste infinie. Avec passion et intensité, elle brave les vents et les marées. Sous les cieux calmes, elle navigue sans peur. Chaque étoile, une lueur, une promesse de bonheur. Son cœur brûle avec une force inégalée. Elle trace des constellations, un chemin enchanté. Elle effleure les rêves avec des doigts de satin. Dans la nuit étoilée, son âme trouve un écrin. C'est pas légère, des plumes dans le vent. Son sourire éclaire comme un diamant. Dans les cieux, ses rêves prennent leur envol. force, sans parole, douce comme la brume, précieuse et sereine. Elle récolte les étoiles, tisse des rêves urbains. En passant par les galaxies, déséquilibre les systèmes, chaque mouvement, une onde de lumière. Comme une supernova, son éclat surgit, créant des galaxies dans son sillage, immortalisée en lumière voyageuse, lumière éternelle.
What ended up happening, and I tell the story much more detail in the book, but what ended up happening is they were killed in mass bombing during this time. And of course, it was very traumatic.
Buenos días a todos, qué bueno que están aquí. Hoy nos toca una sesión especial con un video donde se entrevista al autor del libro, Morgan Housel. Gracias, Nats, por compartirnos el video y pues a darle porque usa varios minutos. Listo. May, bienvenida de la dimensión desconocida.
Morgan Housel, un periodista convertido en inversionista, nos ha llevado a cuestionar nuestras creencias sobre riqueza y éxito. Excolumnista de The Wall Street Journal y The Motley Fool, Housel transformó conceptos complejos en ideas simples y poderosas. Su libro The Psychology of Money ha sido traducido a más de 50 idiomas. Morgan Housel no solo analiza números, analiza las personas.
Hey everyone, how are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, Morgan. We're so excited to have you here. Thanks for accepting our invitation. Before we start, I'm going to switch to Spanish because I'm going to do some housekeeping instructions first, and then
Sure.
we'll come back to you, okay?
Sounds good.
Great. Bueno, a todos, muchas gracias por
All
estar
right,
acá.
everyone. Thank you very much for being here. This is a talk that we thought so everyone that is in this event can be able to attend this session. It's going to be streamed in the different scenarios of the university, and we're going to have Spanish interpretation. And if you want to see the streaming, you can select whether you want to see this in English or Spanish. So please take advantage of this opportunity to learn with one of the best authors and a great person in this finance world. Anything else you would like to tell them? Well, just one very important, and is that if for some reason you're eating a burger or you're having lunch or something, this talk is going to be recorded and you're going to be able to watch it until February 28th. Back to you, Morgan.
Thanks so much. So I want to start with a question. I want to ask you about a story that you tell in your book of how, by a brainless decision that you make, you basically saved your life. You were saved by a brainless decision. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I grew up as a competitive ski racer, and it was such a fun childhood. I just grew up skiing 6 days a week. It was so much fun. And I had this situation when I was 17 years old where I was skiing with two of my best friends, and we would often ski what's called out of bounds, which is you're not skiing in the ski resort. You're going off the backside of the ski resort, basically out in the middle of Mother Nature. And it's so much fun. It's such a good skiing out there. And we had skied these out of bounds area. The three of us had skied it that morning. My two friends wanted to make another run. They wanted to do it again. And for whatever reason, I did not want to. So I said, you guys go do it. I'm going to go do something else, but you guys take another run. And what ended up happening, and I tell the story in much more detail in the book, but what ended up happening is they were killed in a massive avalanche during this time. And of course, it was very traumatic for me. And I'm sure you have lost people who are dear to you. I'm not saying I'm unique in this sense, but it was a big deal at the time. And it wasn't until a little while later that I started realizing, like, why didn't I go on that second run with them? Why did I say, hey, I'm going to go do something else? And there is no answer to that. It was, I didn't make a list of the pros and cons. I didn't set out and say, here's why going on another run is going to be risky. It was just a dumb decision that I made, and it saved my life. Completely and utterly saved my life. And if I had not have done that, I would have had no career, no marriage, no kids. And I think
you wouldn't be here at MoneyCon.
That's the most important part, right? And I think all of us have a similar story like that. I'm sure you do too. Of you made a decision at one point in your life, and you look back and you say that decision completely changed my life for better or worse. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but we all have these. And you realize that decision, you didn't put any thought into it. It just felt like you were just going about your day. And so you realize how fragile life can be, positive and negative. And when you come to terms with that, I think you become much more able to just kind of let go. Not really a fatalist, but you're able to just say, I don't have a lot of control over what's going to happen today. You could win the lottery today. You could get in a car accident today. And a lot of those things, no matter what you do, no matter how careful you are, some of those really good and really bad things are outside of your control. That's true for your individual life, but it's also true for the broader world, whether it is something like COVID. You know, how many people spent 2019 planning about what 2020 would be like for them, planning their individual life and planning out their business and whatnot. And none of those plans mattered because COVID just erupted everything. And so you become a little bit more just letting loose and saying, I'm going to try the best I can. I'm going to do the best I can in my career and for my family and for my business. But the truth is, the biggest events in life are hanging by a thread. The world is very fragile, and there's not a lot I can do about it.
I don't know if that makes me anxious or not. So
see, I think if I can follow, I think it makes me calmer, because I think I get anxious when I say, God, there's so many things that I should be doing to make myself safer. And I think you become a little calmer when you're like, look, I'm going to do the best I can. But the truth is, there's not a lot that I can do. And I would also say that a lot of those events that are outside of your control are positive. It's you meet somebody in a bar and you didn't think anything of it, and they end up becoming your spouse. Yeah. It's you're at a conference like this and you network with someone and it ends up leading to an amazing job opportunity. A lot of those things outside of your control end up being a good thing.
And what are the things that are under our control that we can like start doing? I mean, if I come to terms with the fact that I can't control most of the decisions that I make and the outcomes that come out of it, what can I control? What can I do about it?
I think it's true in almost every endeavor in life, but definitely with money, that you cannot control the economy. You cannot control the stock market. You cannot control your own employer, but you can change your own behavior. That's the only thing that you have control over is your own behavior. And that's actually really great, because in money, nothing is going to matter more than that. So I have no idea what the stock market's going to do next, but I can control how I respond to volatility. And luckily, how I respond to volatility, just my demeanor, and do I panic? Do I get excited? That's what matters more than anything in investing. And so the only thing you can control ends up being by far the most important thing to your success. I think that's true for a lot of things in life. It's not what happens to you, it's just how you end up dealing with them. And I do think there is something to say, though, that when you realize how dangerous and fragile the world can be, you focus less on how can I make a fortune? How can I do this? And you focus more on how can I just become durable? I just want to make sure that, because I know with 100% certainty that in my life, in your life, in all of our lives, if we're fortunate enough to live another 50 years, we're going to deal with a lot of hardship, health issues, economic issues, relationship issues, issues with our kids, whatever it might be. We're going to 100% certainty. And then so you realize, like, it's more about how can I deal with those inevitabilities and not get knocked down. And so for me, financially, let's say, even though it's much broader than that, but financially, years, that I want to make sure that none of the inevitable problems are going to force me out and knock me down and push me to a spot where I can't recover. And so I think that's like an irony. It looks like you're being pessimistic with your finances, but it's like, no, I'm so optimistic that I want to do everything to make sure that I can stay in the game for as long as I can. But part of that is rooted in the fact that I know with certainty that every year, if not more, there's going to be things in my life and around the world that I didn't see coming, I didn't expect, and that are big challenges that we need to overcome.
That's so true. Morgan, you started as an investor. You were a journalist for the Wall Street Journal, for the Motley Fool. When did you start realizing that psychology played such a huge role in our lives? And why did you end up writing this book, The Psychology of Money?
I think a big thing for me, so I started as a writer in 2008. Fun year, 2008. Everything was erupting and melting down. And so I spent the first couple of years as a writer just trying to answer this very broad question of what happened in 2008 at the highest level. Like, how did that happen? How did all the banks collapse from a housing bubble and people lost all, like, just what happened here? And it was a realization as the years went on that you could not answer that question, what happened in 2008, if you were just looking through the lens of finance and economics. Like, there's nothing in an economics textbook that would explain why 2008 happened. But if you were looking through the lens of psychology and sociology and political science and history, all these other topics, they perfectly explained what happened. So the housing bubble is, just trying to keep up with your peers, and greed and fear in the stock market, that's all psychology. And so it was this realization that the most important parts of money and the biggest hole in economics could be explained if you just went broader and you looked at it not as spreadsheets and numbers, but you looked at it as behavior and psychology. So not only did I think it got you closer to the truth of what was happening, but I think it was just way more exciting. I was never into charts and spreadsheets, but I love stories about what people were thinking. That was just so much more interesting to me. So if I stayed in finance and I was just doing spreadsheets and charts, I'd be so bored. But when you view it as like, oh, let me tell you some stories about the crazy ways that people think and the crazy ways that I think, it's way more interesting and fun. And then I can keep reading about it all day long.
You're such a great storyteller. And in your book, you have so many stories of people that have become filthy rich, but are not happier. Why is it that the more money you have doesn't really mean that you're going to be happier in life?
I think it's so obvious to most people. It's such a knee-jerk reaction to think that, look, I have problems in my life right now, but if I had more money, then the problems would go away. It's such an easy thing to think about. Like, if only I had more money, then all these issues I'm dealing with would go away. And money can solve some of your problems, but certainly not all of them. So I think why a lot of rich people are actually angrier and sadder and more depressed than when they were poor is because when they're poor, they can say, if only I had more money, all these problems would go away. And then they become rich and they still have all these problems. So then they're like, look, I don't even know what the solution is anymore. When I was poor, I had a solution. It was get more money. Now that I'm rich, I'm still sad, but there's nothing else I can do about it. And I think it's actually, look, you don't have a lot of sympathy for very wealthy people, of course, but it's a very common thing that these people are actually sadder and more depressed because they lose the hope that they had when they were poor. When they were poor, it was, if only I'm rich, then things will get better. And then it's not. And so it's also true for a lot of people that you say, oh, if I had $1,000, I'd be happier. And then you get $1,000 and it doesn't make you happier. So then you say, well, it must be $2,000. That's what I need. And then you get 2,000, it doesn't make you happier. So then you're, well, 10,000, if I had 10,000, and you keep going forever. And so a lot of these people end up just working harder, longer hours, and taking more risk because they think, it's intuitive to think, if only I had more money, then it would go away. I think that's the root of it. But I want to make clear that I think money can solve a lot of problems. It can give you independence. It can help with your health. It can give you, look, will people love you more if you have more money? Probably not. But if you have more money and you have a nice big house, will it make having your friends over easier? Will it make having your grandchildren over easier? Yes. And having friends and grandchildren, all that makes you happier. So money is often an indirect path. It's not that money will make you happier, but it can do things in your life that bring actual genuine happiness to you.
I want to go back to the example you were saying of a person that says, if I have $1,000, then I'll be happy. Then it wasn't $1,000, it's 2,000, then it's a million, then it's whatever. How can we get the goalpost to stop moving? I mean, how can we manage to be happy with what's enough?
The honest answer, and it's not the answer that people want to hear, but it's the honest answer, is there's not a lot. And I mean, there's some around the edges. I'll get to that in a second. But the truth is, the reason that we have new technology and progress, and the reason that we are living a better life today than we were 100 years ago, is because the vast majority of people wake up every morning and say, this is not enough. I need more. We need better technology. We need more progress. We need more social equality. They're unsatisfied with the state of the world. And by and large, that's a good thing. Like, I want to live in a world where no matter how good things are, 8 billion people wake up every morning and say, we could do better. That's a good thing. And so at the broad level, it's good. At the individual level, it can drive you crazy because no matter how successful you are, you just want more and more and more. So it's very difficult to do. It's easier said than done. I do think there is a thing socially where a lot of people's desire for more money is, if I had more money, people would like me more. People would admire me more. They would look at me more and they would say, oh, look at Morgan's car, look at Morgan's clothes, look at Morgan's house. That's what we intuitively think. And the truth is, no, they won't. No one's thinking about you as much as you are. Nobody cares about your car as much as you do. Nobody is as impressed with your jewelry as much as you are. They're busy worrying about themselves. They're busy thinking about themselves. And that's actually a big relief when you come to terms with that, because then your desire to spend all of your time and energy and money impressing other people just declines. And you start focusing on what actually matters. So I desperately care what my wife thinks about me. I desperately care what my kids think about me and my parents. Yeah, good. Yes, you should. I desperately care what my kids think about me and my parents think about me. And outside of that, and maybe like 3 of my friends, I really don't care that much. And I don't want people to hate me, but I'm not going to waste my time trying to impress them because they're not paying any attention to me. And so once you come to terms with that, I think it's actually a big relief. And then rather than spending your money trying to impress strangers, you can spend your money on independence for you and your family, on like health and spending time with your family. And that's actually going to make you happier.
I was going to ask you that. What makes people happy?
I think at the core, a very simple formula is independence and purpose. That's the formula. Independence plus purpose is what gives people a good life. You need independence to do things on your own terms, and you can do the career that you want, live where you want, and you need a purpose that's driving you there. And so the purpose is going to be different for everyone. I think for me and for a lot of people, it's family. For a lot of people, it's religion. For a lot of people, it's helping other people, whatever it might be. Something where the spotlight is not on you anymore is usually what the purpose is going to be. So if you can use money to have independence and purpose, like that's phenomenal. Use your money to have independence and also use that money to have purpose. So I want an independent life where I can work where I want and live where I want, and I want a purpose. So I want to use my money to help my family. Like that's independent, like regardless of what it is and where on the spectrum you sit. I think that's the very simple formula for what makes people happy.
You talked about impressing others. Why do we spend so much time, so much money trying to impress other people? And how can we liberate ourselves from what other people think about us?
I think at the most basic level, life is a competition for resources. It's a competition for mates, spouses. It's a competition for money. It's a competition for land. That's like at the highest macro level, that's what it is. And because of that, it doesn't matter how much money I have. What matters is that I have more money than you. And that's true for everybody. Because, you know, if I have $100, but you have $101, who's going to get to buy the house? Who's going to get to buy the car? When you view it as a competition for resources, you view it as it doesn't matter what I have, just matters that I have more than you. I think that's unfortunate, but it's almost certainly true.
And is it true at all levels? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to like round up on that. Is it true if I have $1 million and my friend has $1,001,001, do I still compare myself to that, or does that change depending on the amount of money that you have?
I think it's almost worse than that, because if you have $1,001, but your friend has $1,000, then you by and large don't say, oh, great, I'm richer than my friend. What you do is you go find new friends who have $2,000 and you start comparing and you say, I don't have as much as them. And you keep on going forever. So some of the most insecure people who feel the poorest, this sounds crazy, but some of the people who I think feel the poorest are people who are worth $100 million and they compare themselves to people who have $10 billion. It's like, because like that, when it grows exponentially like that, you just change your comparison group. And a lot of times people who only have $1,000 are comparing themselves to people who have $1,001. And then it's like, oh, like I'm close. Like I'm just about ready to catch up with them. But when you get very rich and you have $100 million, but you're comparing yourself to people who have 10 billion, you look at it, you're like, there's no way I can ever get there. There's no way I can achieve them. And then you feel very poor in that situation. And then so people just always find a new peer group to compare themselves to. And so no matter how wealthy you become, you're always just shifting your gaze to someone else. I mean, some of the most petty fights about money and insecurities about money, you're going to find among the top 20 richest men in the world. People who are literally worth $100 billion are being like, yeah, but Elon Musk is worth $400 billion. And I'm so far behind that. And it's kind of silly. But I think that when you view it as a competition for resources, it's unavoidable. And I think it has always been like that, and it will always be like that. But if you can just kind of shift the spotlight away from yourself and more towards independence and purpose, it's fine if other people are getting richer faster than you, and they always will be. There's always going to be people who are richer than you, and it's unavoidable. And so if you could just shift it away and say, look, that's always the case, but I don't want to use money as a tool to compare myself to others by. I want to use money as a tool to give myself a better life and to have independence and purpose. Easier said than done, but if you can try that, I think that's the best we can do.
It's like what Howard Marks says, that there's nothing that fucks up someone's mind that seeing a best friend becoming rich. And I love that phrase.
It's tough, and that's why when people win the lottery or whatever it might be, there's actually been some studies that show that if your neighbor wins the lottery, you are more likely to go bankrupt in the future. Because you see your neighbor, yes, because you see your neighbor get rich and they get a new car and they get new things, and you're like, I want that too. So I'm going to go into debt to get what they have.
Oh my God.
Wow. Let's talk about our kids.
Yeah. So before we go into that, I want to ask you, how were you brought up? I mean, did your parents teach you about finance? How was the financial education in your house before you started like working in this?
My childhood was, I think, unique in a couple ways, because from the time I was born to the time I was 12 years old, my parents were very poor. They were students. We had no money. And it was a happy childhood. It was a good childhood, but we had nothing. And then my dad became a doctor when I was 12. And then he earned that we had a nice upper middle class life after that. And I think that's unique because most people, it's one or the other. They're either poor their entire childhood or they're wealthy their entire childhood. I saw very cleanly both sides. And so I know what it was like to be very poor. I know what it was like to be comfortable. What was very interesting about my parents is that the frugality that was demanded by my parents when they were poor, they couldn't spend any money. They didn't have any money. That stuck with them when they started earning more money. So when they started earning more money, they were very frugal. They were big savers and whatnot. And I think when I was a teenager, I looked down upon that because I would say, I know how much money you guys make, and we're not spending any of it. There's like look at the cars we're driving. We're not spending any of it. But then I realized as I became an older adult, the fact that my parents were such big savers gave them independence. And my dad retired when he wanted to. The moment he was done working, he just said, I'm done. I'm out. And he could because he had saved up all of his money. And that was the first moment when I was like, oh, money can give you independence, and independence is going to make you way happier than any car will or any house will. And so I think seeing that was really important. I also say, it's important to point out that when you become an adult, to figure out what your parents did wrong too, or not necessarily wrong, but say you maybe could have done this better. So were my parents too frugal? I think at one point in their life, yes, they've gotten better now. They've figured out how to use their money to be happier now. But I think there are a lot of people that money controls their identity. And it's mostly people who are saving too much. Their entire identity is I'm a saver and my net worth goes up every month. And they are a slave to that. They're beholden to that. And they cannot it's almost impossible for them to use money to go on a nice trip, a nice vacation with their family. They can't do it because all they want to do is save, save, save. So I think my parents may have been some of that at one point, but to their credit, they eventually figured it out.
What can you do to change that? I mean, if I have that personality and I'm a saver and I know that I'm this type of person, how can I change, or what skills or can I learn, or what can I do to change that if I know that it might be like keeping me from having more fun or spending more money to be more happy?
I think there's two answers to that question. One is the question you always want to ask is, what am I going to regret on my deathbed? If I'm on my deathbed, I have 24 hours to live, I'm looking back at my life, what am I going to regret? So it's never as simple as live for today or save for tomorrow. That's too simplistic. It's always, what am I going to regret looking back? Here's how I think about it for myself personally. I have two young kids. And if something happened to me and I were to die tomorrow, I would not regret at all the frugality and the money that I've saved right now, because I would take so much pleasure knowing that my wife and kids are going to be taken care of after I'm gone. And I'd be like, yes, I've saved all this money and now that's all for them. Like, couldn't be better. But look, if I was 95 years old and I had a ton of money in the bank and I was on my deathbed, I might look back and say, man, what about all the trips I could have taken? I could have donated this money to people. So it shifts depending on where you are in life. And so right now I'm like, look, I'm a big saver because I got these young kids to take care of. But I hope that in 50 years from now, I'm not saying that anymore. I hope in 50 years from now, I say, I'm giving it away and I'm trying to help other people. And that's what I want to do with my money. So it's always shifting. The other thing is, what the kind of spending that's going to make me happy might not make you happy, and vice versa. Everybody's different. Everyone's got their own little things. And since there's no clean formula on what's going to work, you have to try a million different things. So do a lot of experimenting. Like try next month, spend more money on food, buy fancier food. It might make you happier. It might not. Good. Now you learned something. Next time you go on a vacation, spend 10% more than you normally would. It might make you happy. It might not. For some people, flying first class on an airplane is a complete waste of money. They think it's a scam. Other people are like, I would never sit behind row 3. That's like, I'm never going to do it. So everybody's different, and you have to experiment with what's going to work for you to figure out what you should be, like what's going to make you happy versus what's just controlling your identity.
How do you teach your children about money?
I think whenever I get that question, my answer is, you don't need to teach them about money, because regardless of what you do, they're paying attention. And so you don't need to sit them down and say, let me teach you about compound interest. Let me teach you about budgeting. They're already paying attention to what you're doing and what you're saying, whether you realize it or not. Kids are so incredibly good at learning without knowing they're learning, of just picking up subtle cues. So with money, every time your kids hear you say, we can't afford that, they're making a little note in their brain. Yeah. Every time they see you arguing with your spouse about money, they're making a little note in their brain. Every time they see you stressed out because the stock market fell, they're paying attention to that. And so when you realize that, you don't need to sit them down and teach them. What you need to do is learn by example, knowing that they're paying attention to every little thing that you're doing. The other thing that I think about a lot is, I have 2 kids, and I know you have 3 kids. They could not be more different in personalities, even though they have the same parents, the same situation. They're totally different. And so how do I teach my kids financial skills that are going to be universal regardless of where they end up? So I could teach my kids about being a big saver and investing for the future. But is that who they want to be? Maybe that's not who they want to be. Maybe they want to be people who just spend all their money traveling the world, and that's what's going to make them happy. So I shouldn't pretend that my beliefs are the best and that I want to pass them on to them. Of course, I want to teach them good skills and teach them what I can. But I think at some point as a parent, you have to say, I did my best by leading through example, and now I need to let you be who you want to be. The other thing with money is, for a lot of parents, it's like, how can I use the money that I have to give them a better life without spoiling them? And that is easier said than done as well, particularly for wealthier families. It's like, how can I have this money and I want to give my kids a better life, but I want them to be motivated and I don't want to just break them. And one of the things that I've heard some wealthy families say that was really important is, you have to live the same life as your kids. You cannot say, I, the parent, I'm going to live a big fancy life, but I want my kids to learn the hard way. So they're going to be, that just doesn't work. It breeds more resentment and cynicism in your kids than it does like learning hard work and whatnot. So you as a parent have to pick a lifestyle knowing that that's going to set the baseline expectations that your kids are going to have in the future.
Wow. That's amazing. Do you want to die with zero, or do you want to leave money to your kids? Have you read that book, and what do you think about that concept of dying with no money in the bank?
Yeah, I think I have read the book. I think it's a great book. I probably agree with 90% of it, which is pretty good. That's a good grade. Of course, if there's one pushback against it, is that nobody knows when they're going to die. I would love to die with zero if someone told me exactly the day I'm going to die. And so, you know, what's true too, and we're lucky enough to live in a world where a lot of people are going to live into their 90s. And so if you say, I want to die with zero at age 65, well, you might live to 90. So be careful with that. But I think what is so absolutely true is that most people say, I'm going to save a bunch of money, and then when I die, I'll leave it to my kids or I'll leave it to charity. And I think the point the book that makes, it's a very simple point, but it's so important, is you're going to have a lot more joy giving away your money to your kids and to charities while you're alive, particularly for your kids. Your kids might not need money when they're 70 years old. They definitely need it when they're 30 years old. So rather than waiting until you die before they get an inheritance, give them an inheritance when they're 30 and they need it and they have kids of their own. And then you can watch.
I hope my dad is listening to this conversation.
So I think about that with my own kids. Of course, they're young right now, but I would much rather help them buy a house when they're 30 than I would leave them a bigger sum of money when they're 70 and I pass away.
Now that you talk about buying a house, I want to ask you, is it a good financial decision to buy a house, the house you live in, or live out of rent?
The answer is probably not, but most people should still do it. The problem is that they view buying a house as an investment when it's not. It's a pile of wood and bricks that you raise your family in. And then but when you view it as a competitor to the stock market, then people get crazy with it. And they go into tons of debt and they're watching the value of the house left and right. But, you know, is buying a car a good financial investment? No. But you should still do it because you need something to drive you around it. And that's how you should view a house. So my wife and I bought a house. So first of all, we rented for many years, even when we could have afforded to buy, but we rented because it gave us so much flexibility. And we lived in like 6 different cities in our 20s, and it was awesome. It was great. We could just pack up and move somewhere else when we wanted a new adventure. And there was so much value to that. And then as soon as we had our son, our first kid, it was clear as day. It was like, oh, I want the stability of a house so that he could scream all night and then our neighbors don't have to hear it in the apartment. And so we bought a house, but it was not because I thought homes were cheap or a good value or they would go up. I bought it because it was a good thing to raise my family in. And I think once you view it as that, you stop caring about whether it's a good investment. And the people who get into the most problems with homes are people who do think it's a good investment, because those are people who are going to go into the most debt, make the most reckless emotional decisions. If you view it as just a place to raise your family, it's a totally different question.
Oh, totally.
Now that we're talking about investing and knowing that psychology plays such a huge role in the way you behave, how do you invest? I'm curious about how's your portfolio nowadays, and how do you make decisions when you invest your money?
I invest as simply as I possibly can. So truly, my entire net worth is a house, this house I'm sitting in, cash, and index funds, and that's it. I don't think it needs to be more complicated than that for most people. And I love how simple it is because I know where everything is. I can just wrap my head around it in 3 seconds. It's so simple. It's so easy. And the reason I do it simply, the reason it's not more complicated, is because I have no aspirations to be the world's greatest investor, and I never will be. I have no aspirations to earn really high returns this year. What I want to do is earn pretty good returns for the next 50 years. I want to be average for an above average period of time. And I think that's actually how you can maximize wealth. Most people, when they think about investing, they're like, how can I earn big returns this year? That's where their mind goes to. And that can be cool. That can be fine. But you're probably going to earn more money over your life if you say, how can I be average this year and the next year and the next year and the next year, and keep it going for the longest period of time. And so that's how I base my own investments. I I have Vanguard index funds that track the S&P 500. And it's so boring. It's so basic. Nobody wants to talk about it. But I'm like, that's the point. The point is it's so simple that I have a good chance of being able to do that for 50 years. And if I can be average for 50 years, the results are going to be ridiculous. They're going to be nuts. Like if you can be an average investor for 50 years, you will probably end up in the top 1% of all investors in terms of the amount of money that you make. And so not only is it just so simple, so I can spend the rest of my time just doing other things that I enjoy, but I think it actually sets me up to earn the most amount of money that I possibly can over the course of my lifetime, even if in any given year it's not that exciting.
That reminds me of the story you tell in the book about Ronald Reed. Can you tell that story? How he invested, he was like a janitor and he invested for a long period of time.
So every couple of years you hear one of these stories in the newspaper where it's like a total nobody. It's just some person who had no friends, no family. They were a janitor or something, and they die and they have millions and millions of dollars. And you dig into their story and you're like, were they like stock trading geniuses? They said, no, not at all. They just owned stocks for 50 years or 70 years. So Ronald Reed was a janitor. He was just mopping floors at a store, and he didn't have a lot of friends. The friends that he did said that his only hobby was chopping firewood. Like he was just the most ordinary, down-to-earth guy you could imagine. And when he died, he had millions of dollars left over. And it's the same thing. When you dig into it, he bought stocks and held them for 50 years. And it almost didn't matter what stocks he bought. If you can hold them for 50 years, it's going to lead to a fortune over time. And so you can have the most ordinary people with no education, no experience, no background, but they have the right psychology. They have the psychology where they can hang on for 50 years. They have the psychology where they're not going to cash out to buy a fancy car to try to impress other people. They can just keep it going. One point that I wish I made in the book, I wish I had made this clear, is that I don't know if I admire Ronald Reed. I do admire his psychology and how he was able to build wealth. But would he have been happier if he used that money to live in a safer neighborhood, go on some nice vacations, give money away to the friends and family that maybe. He actually may have been happier doing that. So I admire how he built money. I don't know if he did a great job utilizing that money to live a happier life.
So you're saying no crypto, no Bitcoin, no stock picking in your portfolio, just ETFs?
Just ETFs. I'll make the point too that I love watching crypto. I love watching the stock market. I check the stock market every day. I love reading stories about business models and CEOs. I'm on the board of directors of a public company. I love that stuff. I think it's so intellectually fascinating because I think markets and money are the clearest window into people's behavior. Like if I learn about your money, I can learn so much about you, for better or worse. And same for me. It's just people express, it's a window into their identities more than almost anything else in life. If you told me that the kind of music that you like and the kind of food that you eat, I actually don't know that much about you. If you tell me how you manage your money, I'd be like, I know a lot. I know about your insecurities. I know about your goals. I know about your relationship as a couple. You can learn so much about people through that window. So I love watching this stuff because it's such a neat way to understand how people think, but it doesn't influence my behavior. I love watching Bitcoin, but watching it go up does not give me FOMO to want to go out and buy more. It's just interesting to watch.
Let's talk about FOMO. I heard you said that FOMO is like the worst thing that you can feel if you want to be successful while investing.
Yeah, it's impossible, I think. It's absolutely impossible to do well financially if you have FOMO. Because there's always going to be somebody getting richer than you. There's always going to be stocks going up faster than yours. That's always the case, and it's unavoidable. And really what FOMO is you are outsourcing your critical thinking to other people's emotions. You're watching somebody else get rich very quickly, and they're getting very excited about how rich they're getting, and you're like, I want that. Like that emotion that he has, I want it. If you realize how important being unemotional is in finance, you realize, of course, it's completely reckless. What's bad about it, what's so dangerous about it, is that it's easy to misinterpret FOMO as learning from other people's experience. So you see somebody trading stocks and they're getting rich, and you're like, oh, I want to learn from them. They have a strategy. I'm learning. Learning is good. How could I be upset about learning? You think you're learning, but you're not. It's not actually learning. You're just getting caught up in the FOMO of wanting what they have. And it's actually hard to tell if what you're doing is learning or falling for FOMO. And of course, there are new technologies. So let's say you go back to the 1980s and you see Microsoft stock is exploding. In hindsight, you should have watched that and be like, hey, there's something going on here. This is learning, and you should be a part of it. In hindsight, that's what we know. But for every other example that you can think of, for every one of those examples, there are 10 examples of people who just watched a stock go up and they chased it and they end up losing all their money. And that happens way more often. So I think it's important that the phrase that I use is that we should all live in our own humble bubble. I want to live in a bubble where I think about money as it pertains to me and my family and nobody else. And in a humble way, in a respectful way, I don't care what you're doing with your money. I don't care how rich you're getting. I don't care if you are earning higher returns than me. I want to live in a bubble where it's just like, I want to use money as a tool for me and my family without getting caught up or wanting to chase whatever you're doing.
Morgan, you wrote a fascinating book, Same as Ever. What are the things that never change, and how can we use that in our favor?
I think it's true as an amateur student of history, as I'm sure you are and many people are. I love reading history and realizing what has changed over time. So you read about what life used to be like before our modern technologies. And it's so fascinating to see what's changed. But the more interesting thing about history is what has never changed. So it's so often, particularly in money, but for lots of things actually, that you read a book about something that happened 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and you realize that what they are doing and what they are thinking is exactly what people would do today. And then you're like, some things have never changed. And the things that never change tend to be the behaviors of how people think about greed and fear and risk. They're the same today as they were 1,000 years ago. And because of that, they're going to be the same 1,000 years from now. So you can put all of your effort into being like, look, I have no idea what the next technology is going to be, but I know exactly how people are going to respond to it, whatever it might be, because that's never changed. And so the book outlines lots of different things. Like realistically, you could think of thousands of behaviors that never change. I outlined like 20 of them in the book. Things like, for example, let me just give you some of them. The best story wins. In any business, in any country, in any society, it's not the person with the right answer that's going to win and get the most attention. It's the person who tells the best story is always going to win and get the best attention. And because of that, you often have people who are very intelligent and they come up with the quote unquote right answer and they get no attention. And in their place, you have a politician or an entrepreneur whose ideas are terrible, but they're very persuasive telling them. And that person's going to get all the attention. It has always been like that and always will. And it will drive you crazy if you're kind of like a math-based thinker who thinks the way should always prevail. One of them is the idea, we kind of spoke about this a little bit earlier, but the idea that risk is what you don't see coming. So I can, and I should, and you should, look at your life and say, what are the biggest risks in my life right now? Because I want to work on those to try to make them better. That's a good thing. It is unavoidable. It is always the case that in hindsight, a year from now, you're going to look back and say, the biggest actual risk, the thing that did the most damage, is what we were not thinking about a year ago. So I mentioned earlier, if you were trying to plan in 2019 about what the next year was going to be like, you had no idea that a virus was going to upend the entire planet in 2020. You could not have known. Risk is what you didn't see coming. So that is so much confidence that the biggest globally over the next 5 years is something that nobody's talking about today. Like nobody, it's not in any newspaper. No one's talking about it today. And you can state that like that because it's always been like that. There's never been a time in the world when we knew what the biggest risk was well before it happened. It's always been a thing that's a surprise that comes out of the middle of nowhere that nobody saw coming that does the most damage.
True. So I want to go back to investing and getting rich. What are the skills you talk about in your book that there are different skills that you need if you want to create money and there are other skills that you need if you want to preserve it? What are the skills you need?
So the difference between getting rich and staying rich, it's I think when you phrase it like that, it's like, oh yeah, of course there are different skills, but it's actually, there are a lot of people who are very good at getting rich and there are a lot of people who are very good at staying rich or keeping their money, but there's not a lot of both. it's actually pretty rare that you have people who are very good at getting rich and staying rich because they're conflicting skills. They're almost the opposite. Like getting rich requires being an optimist, being optimistic about yourself, optimistic about the rest of the world, optimistic about the economy. That's what you need to get rich. Like take a risk. Staying rich is almost the opposite. You need to be kind of a pessimist. You need to be like very conservative, and you need to be like wake up every morning and say the world's dangerous. There's a lot of threats out there. You need both of those at the same time to do well over time. And it's almost like this Jekyll and Hyde personality of, on one hand, you need to be very optimistic, on the other hand, very pessimistic. And I actually think there's a way to realize that those are not contradictions. Like I am very optimistic on the future for the whole globe. I'm very optimistic that our kids and our grandkids are going to be living way better than we do 50 years from now. I'm so confident in that. I am equally confident that the road between now and then is going to be extremely difficult for everybody, that the road between now and then is going to be recessions, pandemics, wars, terrorist attacks, like political upheaval. Like it's going to be a nonstop chain of bad news between now and then. So you can be very optimistic and very realistically pessimistic at the same time. So same as ever, I couldn't figure out who to dedicate it to because my first book was dedicated to my wife, kids, and parents. I kind of ran out of people to dedicate it to. So I dedicated same as ever to what I called the reasonable optimist. And I didn't even describe what that was, but to me, a reasonable optimist is someone who is very optimistic about the future, and they're very reasonable about how difficult it's going to be to get there. I think that's the mindset you need to get rich and stay rich at the same time.
Can you give us an example of someone that's very good becoming rich and staying rich?
Yeah, my favorite example of this was Bill Gates, who of course founded Microsoft, who when he started the company in the 1970s, he probably took the most audacious business risk that anyone has ever taken. Well, back in the 1970s, he said, I foresee a future when every desk in the world has a computer on it. That was like the craziest thing that anyone could possibly say. So huge risk taker. At the same time, when he started the company, he said, I always want to have enough cash in the bank so that I can run the company for 12 months with no revenue, which is the most pessimistic way to run a business. And so you have both of those at the same time, crazy risk taking and crazy pessimism at the same time. And that's why it works. And I think you can say that there are probably dozens of tech thinkers who are smarter than Bill Gates over the past, but they all went out of business. They just didn't make it. They were so optimistic in their business decisions that they had no room for error. They had too much debt. They had not enough cash, and they all went bankrupt. And so to have someone who is equally risk-taking and pessimistic at the same time is incredibly rare.
Morgan, let's talk about mindset. You are one of the most successful authors in the world. I want to know, what are your habits? What do you read? Who are your mentors? How do you prepare to be world-class in what you do?
Well, thank you. I would say this is by design. The strategy is having no strategy. I think the more, particularly for reading and for thinking and for learning, the more you try to come up with a formula, the worse it's going to get. And the reason is because any formula that I make for this is what I like to read, this is how I do read, is going to confine me to a narrow little box where I think you're going to do the best learning if it's just random and sporadic. And so I don't know what kind of books I'm going to learn from. So if I have a formula of I only read nonfiction books, I only read business books, I only read books by these authors, there's so much out there that I'm missing that I don't even know about. So I will start reading any book that looks slightly interesting to me. Slightly a little bit interesting, I'm going to start reading it. The other side of this is that I have a very strong filter. So I will start reading any book that looks interesting. I will slam it shut the moment that I'm bored with it. I have no tolerance for bad books. And by the way, a lot of books might be bad for me and great for other people and vice versa. People are just at a different state. So I have nothing against, like, I respect every author who writes a book, but there's a lot that are not going to work for me. And so if you have a very wide funnel, I will start reading any book that looks interesting, and a very tight filter. I will slam shut every book that bores me. You're expanding your horizons so much. Like that's when you're going to come across a book that you never would have thought was interesting. I'll give you an example of this. There's a book called The Box, and it is a history of the shipping container. Like, what could be more boring than that? Like, that is that. Like, at the outset, you're like, that sounds like the driest, dumbest book in the world. It is so fascinating because the shipping container completely upended geopolitics and international trade. And like nothing, like there are few technologies that have had a bigger influence on geopolitics than this metal box. And so there's things like that where I would have never had any idea how interesting it was until you start reading it. And you're like, oh, wow, this is actually fascinating. And I think the reverse is true. Some books might look very fascinating. You start really reading them and you're like, oh, this is just dry statistics. I'm not going to get anything out of this. We were talking earlier before this about, I've always wanted to get into science fiction books, and I've never been able to. I try it and I'm like, it's not working for me. And I just found a book. It's called The Unincorporated Man, science fiction that I love. It's so good. I'll give you a very quick synopsis of the book. It's about a guy who is cryogenically frozen when he dies in 1980, and he was brought back to life 300 years from now. And so the book is about someone from our era waking up 300 years from now and getting used to their new technology. And there are so many times in that book where I will stop and close it and just ponder what that would be like. It is so like expanding to your mind in a positive way. And I think if you're only reading nonfiction history or whatnot, like there's so much out there that you're missing. So I guess a very long-winded way to answer your question. I try to read as much as I possibly can without bogging myself down in things that are not going to do it for me.
Awesome. Who would you like to have a coffee with?
I love so there's a song from the Foo Fighters, and there's a line in there that says, "There goes my hero, he's ordinary." And I love that. There goes my hero, he's ordinary. He's not Winston Churchill, he's not Franklin Roosevelt, he's not Abraham Lincoln. I think there's more interesting things to learn from ordinary people than we give credit to. So it sounds silly, but if I could have coffee with anyone from history, I might pick an ordinary farmer from 1700. I think you could learn so much because their life is going to be more relevant to my life than what Winston Churchill could teach me. The other thing is that we know everything about Winston Churchill. There's like 1,000 books about Winston Churchill. I'm not going to learn much from him. It's all documented. But the farmer from 1700, nobody knows anything about him. His story is lost to time. And because of that, there's going to be things that we can learn about them that I would have never known. And so there goes my hero. He's ordinary.
Amazing.
Awesome. Just to finish up, last question, Morgan. Any message you want to leave here to everyone listening to you here at Monicon?
I think the most important thing with money is that it's individualistic, and what is going to work for me might not work for you. A lot of people will complain that my books are not prescriptive. Never will I say you should do this. Yeah. And the reason I do that is because I don't know you, and what you want is different from what I want, and that's fine. That's okay. So looking in the mirror and just trying to figure out what works for you and your family, even if it doesn't work for other people, is probably the most overlooked part of money. And there are plenty of people who criticize my financial decisions and say, Morgan, like what you do with your money, you could do a better job if you did X, Y, and Z. And I always say, like, look, this works for me. And like, do I get any credit for that? Do I get any credit for the fact that like my family's happy for doing this, even if it might not work for you? And so if you and I have a different taste in food, we don't look down upon each other. But money, people do. People do judge each other and criticize each other because we think that there should be one right answer, even when there's not.
That's so true.
Morgan, I want to thank you for your generosity. I want to thank you for your time. It was such a pleasure for me. It's an honor to be speaking with you after reading your books more than 7 or 8 times, after giving out your book to more than 1,000 people.
2,000.
2,000 people. I don't know. I lost count. I mean, you've been such an influence in my life, in our life. Well. So we really want to thank you for being part of this first Monicon event. And we hope this is the first of many conversations.
And I'm sure you've been an inspiration for the more than 8,000 people that are watching you right now. So thanks so much for accepting our invitation. We're so excited to have the chance to talk to you.
It's been an honor to be here, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Morgan. Have a great day.
Bye, Morgan.
Thank you.
Traes el micro apagado, Michael.
Como la canción de la leche muy fría y la leche muy caliente, que lo apague, que lo prenda. ¿Quién entiende? ¿Cómo les fue? Fíjense qué interesante. El libro no no hace prescripciones, o sea, no te dice cómo actuar, de qué forma hacer las inversiones o ahorrar, lo que dijo al final, ¿no? Y que lo que critican por eso, si no es más como eh, para empezar a tener la conversación de dinero contigo mismo, ¿ok? Anoté dos libros, uno es del contenedor, ¿no? Y supongo que si alguien quiere saberlo, les mandamos las referencias. Bueno, ¿qué se quedan con este enfoque?
Pues fue mucho, o sea, en primero lidiar, creo que inició con lidiar eventos, que están fuera de nuestro control, ¿no? Saber lidiar. Y las finanzas son conservadoras. Son muchos, muchos puntos, o sea, la comparación, evitar compararte, no vivir, o sea, pensarte y cuestionarte o sea, darle el nivel de urgencia, ¿no? O sea, ¿qué voy a hacer? ¿Qué puedes hacer si mañana mueres? O sea, darle urgencia a tu libertad. Y lo que me gustó fue que él, a pesar que admiraba a la persona que acumuló por 50 años su riqueza, darle el valor de que hubiera sido, a lo mejor si tomara parte de esa riqueza para disfrutar mejor, ¿no? Y vuelve las emociones, o sea, las habilidades es a nivel emocional y tener tolerancia, ¿no? O sea, está muy interesante.
Pero
Digo,
es
estaba rápido
parte de la riqueza de lo que tenía ese hombre para disfrutar.
para disfrutar, ajá.
Pero a ver, la palabra importante es parte,
Parte, ajá.
no
No todo.
todo, y que estés
Y lo que
al
no tiene,
día,
lo que muchos
viviendo
no
al
tienen.
día, exacto. Y parte como que se escucha mucho por debajo del 50%, ¿eh?
Ajá, y ahora entiendo, o sea, ahora entiendo, digo, hasta el título, ¿verdad? O sea, tener la psicología para tolerar y vivir en esos 50 años, tolerar tu resistencia para no tomar.
Sí, pero cada vez me la van complicando más, Mike.
¿Por qué?
Darren
Dígame.
Hardy dice 3 años, ¿no? Y después Morgan Housel en su libro dice 10 años, 30 años. Y ahorita dice 50, 70. Que la
Bueno,
próxima vez
dio
que
una
lo conozca
historia,
en
¿no?
vivo va a decir 100 años de paciencia.
No, comparte el ejemplo de la vivencia de esa persona, ¿no? Del
Ok.
cortador de leña que durante 50 años. No está diciendo que es el plazo para eso, pero el mismo factor, una cosa es hacerse rico, otra mantenerse, y yo entendí, seguirte haciendo rico. Entiendo que es seguir produciendo, como Bill Gates. Más o menos, fue mi percepción.
Más o menos. Yadi,
Yo,
tienes la mano levantada.
Hola, hola a todos, sí.
Hola,
Pues
ya.
me voy con varias, pues la verdad es que me voy un poco más contenta con varias cosas,
¿Un
porque
poco más
aquí
que?
platica contenta con varias cosas porque una parte de mi pensamiento coincide con él. Quizá yo al estar viviendo en una época en un pueblo, él en un momento en una ciudad más grande y otro en un momento en un país, tengo este contraste de muchos estilos de vida. Entonces, cuando yo hablo de la dignidad de los seres humanos, es como eso mismo. No puedes pensar que no tiene dignidad la persona que se encarga de limpiar los baños o la persona que se encarga de cultivar tus productos. Es decir, no es tan digno como tú por tener más dinero en el banco, más inversiones. Pues no, no creo. Pero es un estilo de vida diferente. Es decir, no sabemos qué luchas tienen cada uno de ellos y qué luchas tenemos nosotros que estamos trabajando y estamos en distintos puntos de vista. No es ni bueno ni malo uno ni el otro, sino que es más bien como integrarlo. Yo conocí gente muy feliz en el campo, la gente más feliz que yo pude ver, sin problemas que estaba pasando con las inversiones a nivel mundial, sin saber cuánto estaba aumentando las crisis monetarias, lo que tú quieras, ¿no? Y vivían una vida tranquila y feliz hasta el final de sus tiempos, en una época, ¿no? Pero otras personas que pues también vivían cómodamente con sus casas, con sus coches, con sus terrenos, en fin. Entonces creo que aquí habla de estos contrastes que existen y creo que la humildad, una parte que me puse a indagar, ¿qué es la humildad? ¿Qué es la humildad? Y creo que es en el sentido de estar tranquilo con lo que tienes o como esta parte de agradecer lo que hay, lo que tienes en el momento. Y esta parte también de evitar esta comparación, que es una cuestión que nos pasa constantemente. Estamos en un mundo donde el mismo mundo nos está comparando todo el tiempo. Entonces es complicado quitarte ese punto para no querer desear algo que ni siquiera quieres, ¿me explico? A veces no sé si pasa que ustedes están en Facebook o en Instagram o algo así, sale una con un curso, con una clase, con un nuevo método, con una nueva cosa y se muestra a alguien diciendo, ah, sí, ya logré los millones, logré los miles, ya en 5 días, en un mes, en no sé qué. Y le das clic. Y luego cuando te das cuenta dices, pero es que yo realmente no quería eso. O sea, ni siquiera lo estoy buscando. Solo un día fue de curiosidad que busqué algo y entró eso, ¿no? Entonces, también eso, como que estar muy, muy claro de lo que quieres en ese momento de tu vida, en tu intención de vida y que este va cambiando. Creo que tenemos que ser muy claros que esto va cambiando, porque dice él, eh, quizá hoy, y eso es lo que debemos de atender, quizá hoy el autor dice, hoy voy a querer tener mis inversiones ahí montadas 50 años, hoy, bajo mi expectativa, bajo mis creencias de hoy. Pero quizá él en un par de años decida hacer algún cambio, porque también él comenta esto, no solo identificarse como el ahorrador, sino experimentar otras cosas, atreverse a experimentar cosas. Por ejemplo, hoy intencionalmente decido gastar mi dinero en la heladería para probar qué se siente ahora usar el dinero en otras cosas que aparentemente para mí no, como soy ahorrador, pues no lo gastaría. ¿Me explico? Entonces dice, dense ese gusto para saber qué se sentiría y no quedarse solo en el punto de soy ahorrador totalmente. No sé si me explico. Entonces, eh, creo que ahí es donde dice, no se, como no se encajen, no se encuadren en un solo pensamiento, sino estréchense. Y ustedes se van a estrechar conforme crezcan, conforme conozcan más personas que hacen otros movimientos, otras inversiones, otros estilos de vida. O sea, sí se va a estrechar las posibilidades. Entonces no es como quédense ahí, sino estréchense. Creo que hacia ahí va apuntando la idea. Y listo, gracias.
Gracias, Yar. Para cerrar, Asa.
Bueno, creo que es algo muchísimo, muy importante que se engloba en dos cosas. Primero, volverse millonario para la mayoría puede parecer aburrido, porque muchos de los comentarios que leo aquí era el conserje y se dedicaba a cortar árboles, pero de repente esa para él era su vida feliz. Él estaba viviendo su vida felizmente, ¿no? Y su dinero estaba trabajando. Entonces nos enseña que de repente volverse millonario no es como esta parte de la adrenalina y, ¿sabes qué? Métele 10 millones de dólares por aquí y luego hay otros dos por acá, sino que es algo constante que se puede lograr a través del tiempo y que de repente en ese proceso tú vas a conocer lo que realmente quieres y vas a terminar haciendo otra cosa totalmente diferente, ¿no? Entonces, también darnos cuenta de esta parte, porque muchas veces ese enfoque total en el dinero pues, nos aparta de lo que realmente queremos, ¿no? Entonces tenemos un ejemplo donde pues, alguien se vuelve millonario y pues sigue haciendo sus actividades. Le encantaba cortar árboles y hacer leña y él estaba disfrutando de su vida, estaba viviendo, tenía un grupito de amigos que lo veía normal y todo, entonces también como ver esa contraparte de la vida fancy que a veces nos dicen, no, pues es que esta tiene que ser la vida del millonario y de repente pues también es cuando hay a quien pues puede que no se le haga tan atractivo ser millonario, ¿no? Entonces, como estos contrapesos que puede haber en la vida, y Michael levantó la mano, son 8-8 y ya cierro aquí mi participación.
Sí, fíjate que me quedo con varias cosas. Ya lo entendemos, hay varias historias que nos ayudan a ver esto, pero lo que pusiste, Mike, sí es lo más importante. Yo pensé que tenía una parte de contradicción Morgan Housel, tal vez sí, porque dice independencia y propósito, pero después dice, pues es que tienes que ver lo que te hace feliz. Entonces, parece que se pueden poner las tres juntas, no hay problema, pero que tengas independencia. La gente que estaba muy feliz cortando la leña, sembrando la milpa, tienen esa independencia, tienen un propósito y también hay un espacio importante para ser feliz determinado. Lo importante, como dice ya, hoy intencionalmente decido utilizar mi dinero en heladería, punto, o en tal cosa, para que conscientemente lo vivas. Pero nuevamente regresamos lo que hablamos ayer, tu declaración de propósito, ¿no? ¿Qué propósito tienes en la vida? ¿Qué propósito le asignas a $1,000,000? ¿Cuál le asignarías a $100,000,000? ¿Cómo quieres llegar a ese propósito? Pero realmente que hay un propósito establecido. Todos los coaches y mentores del crecimiento personal dicen sobre el propósito. Necesitas tener algo que esté por encima de ti, que prevalezca después de que mueras, para que le veas sentido a hacer más de lo que necesitas. Si quieres hacer más de lo que necesitas y si quieres dejar un legado. Amigos y amigas, gracias por estar, quedarse 10 minutos más, que tengan un excelente día. Nos vamos a trabajar porque se ocupa facturar.
Pero pídeles que prendan su cámara para la foto, digo, una foto un poco tardada, pero
Esos marcas, listos, sonrisa, princesa. Una, dos, tres.
México, Kelly, I love it.
No sé por qué me salió, pero ahí va.
Ah, ¿ya? ¿Se
Ya
congeló
está.
la sonrisa ya?
Con Michael eso es la imaginación. Imaginemos que ya.
Michael
Besos a todos.
aprendió de Sandra Hope la técnica de tomar fotos.
¿Cuál?
Te agarra infraganti, y luego estás por aquí, así todo, y te agarra infraganti.
Sí.
Que tenga bonito día.
Gracias, Nat, gracias, Nat, por la
Sí,
Muchas
generación.
gracias,
gracias a
Nat.
todos.
Es más,
Y los voy a
Gracias,
sacar rápido
Michael.
porque tengo una reunión con
Bye.
un recién llegado de la dimensión desconocida.
bye.
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 ¿Aquí en sala, Mike? ¿O what?
Lo voy a terminar. ¿Ya tienes dónde recibir mensajes?
No, ese es el punto.
Pero puedes volver a entrar a esta.
Me pide una clave, ¿me la sabes dar?
Ok. No.